The snow fell in dense sheets, blotting out the streetlights and muffling the sounds of the city. I tugged my coat tighter, the icy wind clawing at my face as I trudged through the empty streets. New Year's Eve had always been a time for celebration, but tonight felt different. Wrong, even. I should have been at the party my friends had insisted on hosting, but a nagging restlessness had pulled me out into the cold. That's when I saw it. The antique shop sat at the edge of a narrow alley I didn't remember seeing before. Its windows glowed faintly, the golden light spilling into the snow-covered street. A single word, "Curiosities," was etched into the frosted glass, the letters curling like old vines. Something about it drew me in, like a moth to a flame. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, its sound sharp and tinny. The shop was impossibly large for the narrow storefront, its shelves crammed with strange objects that seemed to watch me with unseen eyes. A musty smell hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of candle wax. Looking for something special? The voice was low, gravelly, and came from behind the counter. The shopkeeper was a tall, thin man, his face pale and lined like aged parchment. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, black as ink, seemed to pierce straight through me. "I'm just browsing," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. His smile widened, and he gestured to a tall, covered object standing in the corner. "Perhaps you'd be interested in this." I didn't want to step closer, but my feet moved of their own accord. The shopkeeper pulled the cloth away with a theatrical flourish, revealing an ornate mirror. It was tall and narrow, its tarnished silver frame carved with intricate patterns, vines, eyes, and serpentine shapes that seemed to writhe under the dim light. The glass itself shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the shop in warped, dreamlike clarity. "It's beautiful," I murmured, my fingers itching to touch the cold surface. "More than beautiful," the shopkeeper said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It grants wishes, but only on New Year's Eve. Make your wish carefully, and it will come true." I laughed nervously. "That sounds like a fairy tale." The shopkeeper's gaze didn't waver. "Fairy tales often hold a kernel of truth, don't they?" A chill crept down my spine, but something about the mirror held me captive. Before I knew it, I had handed over a crumpled wad of cash and left the shop, the mirror wrapped in brown paper under my arm. The shopkeeper's parting words followed me into the snow. "Happy New Year. May your wishes bring you what you deserve." The mirror fit perfectly in my bedroom, leaning against the wall at the foot of my bed. Its surface caught the faint glow of the streetlights outside, casting strange, shifting patterns on the ceiling. At the stroke of midnight, as fireworks burst outside and cheers echoed faintly through the frozen streets, I made my wish. "I wish for success," I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. "Happiness, a better year than the last." The mirror's surface rippled, the distortion spreading outward like a stone dropped into still water. I blinked, and it was gone, the glass smooth and unbroken. For a moment I felt foolish. It was just a mirror, an old, tarnished antique. Yet, as the night wore on, an unease settled over me, like I'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. The next morning, things seemed normal. The city was quiet, blanketed in snow, and the world felt new, as it always did on the first day of the year. But then the changes began. My boss called unexpectedly, offering me a promotion I hadn't even applied for. Later, I ran into an old friend who'd wronged me years ago. They apologized profusely, tears in their eyes. Everywhere I turned, things fell into place as if the universe were bending to my will. At first, it was exhilarating, but then I began to notice the mirror. My reflection was always off. It mimicked my movements perfectly, yet there was something in its eyes, something predatory. Its gaze lingered a fraction too long, its smile stretching wider than my own. I tried to ignore it, but the mirror's presence grew oppressive. It dominated the room, its surface catching every flicker of light, every shadow. At night, I would wake to find it glowing faintly, its carvings seeming to twist and writhe in the darkness. And then there were the whispers. At first, I thought they were dreams, faint murmurs that faded as I woke. But soon they grew louder, seeping into my waking hours. "Make another wish," they urged, their voices soft and melodic, yet filled with a cruel edge. I resisted at first. But one night, as the snow fell thick and heavy outside, I stood before the mirror, my heart racing. "I wish for love," I whispered. The glass rippled again, and this time I swore I saw faces within it, distorted, twisted visages that pressed against the surface before vanishing into the void. The next day, I met her. She was perfect, too perfect. She laughed at all my jokes, mirrored my every interest, and seemed almost rehearsed. But as the days passed, her gaze began to remind me of the mirror. The realization hit me like a blow. The mirror granted wishes, but it was taking something in return. I began to notice the symbols etched into its frame, symbols that hadn't been there before, glowing faintly in the dark. The mirror was feeding on me, and it was hungry. By the time February rolled around, I could no longer deny the truth. The mirror was alive. It fed off my wishes, each one granting me some fleeting, surface-level success while gnawing at the foundation of my life. The woman it had given me, Maria, was the first to show signs of something unnatural. At first, her perfection was intoxicating. She was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. But her laughter grew hollow, her eyes too bright, too knowing. One night as we sat across from each other at dinner, I noticed she wasn't eating. Her plate was untouched, and yet she smiled at me, her teeth unnervingly white. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice faltering. Her smile widened. "Of course. You wished for me, didn't you?" The words struck me like a slap, and I dropped my fork. She stared at me unblinkingly, her head tilting slightly, almost mechanically, as though she were a marionette waiting for her next cue. I excused myself and fled to the bedroom, my heart pounding. The mirror loomed in the corner, its surface shimmering faintly despite the lack of light. I stared at my reflection, at the tired, gaunt man who stared back at me. "Make another wish," the whispers urged, seductive and relentless. "One more. You deserve it." "No," I said aloud, clenching my fists. The mirror's surface rippled violently, and for a moment I swore I saw my reflection snarl. I stumbled back, the air in the room growing heavy and oppressive. The symbols on the frame glowed faintly, their twisting patterns now unmistakably serpentine. That night Maria was gone. She left no note, no trace, just an empty chair at the dinner table and a lingering sense of unease. But the mirror remained, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. I tried to ignore it, to bury myself in work, but the successes I'd wished for began to sour. My promotion came with an impossible workload. My coworkers' envy turned to outright hostility, and my old friend who had apologized so profusely stopped answering my calls. The mirror's hunger was insatiable. One evening, after weeks of restless nights and unanswered questions, I decided to confront it. Armed with a heavy blanket, I planned to cover the cursed thing, to shut it out of sight and mind. But as I approached, the whispers turned into a cacophony, a rising chorus of voices that seemed to echo from the depths of the glass. "You're mine now," they said, their tones overlapping in a dreadful harmony. "You asked for us." The symbols on the frame flared brighter, casting writhing shadows across the walls. My reflection moved independently, its eyes burning with malice. "Stop this," I shouted, my voice trembling. But the mirror only laughed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the room itself. My reflection pressed its hands against the inside of the glass, as if trying to break free. In a fit of desperation, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy book, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass didn't shatter. It rippled like water, absorbing the blow. My reflection grinned wickedly, mouthing words I couldn't hear. The whispers fell silent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. And in that silence, I realized the truth. The mirror didn't want to be ignored. It wanted more. I spent the next few weeks searching for answers. My work suffered, my health deteriorated, and my friends avoided me as if I carried a disease. The mirror's influence had seeped into every corner of my life, and I was running out of time. In desperation, I turned to the occult. Late nights were spent combing through dusty libraries, obscure websites, and forums dedicated to cursed objects. Finally, I found it. A thread on an old message board, buried beneath years of spam and forgotten posts. It described a mirror much like mine, with carvings that matched the twisting symbols etched into the frame. The author claimed it was a vessel, a trap designed to lure the desperate with promises of wish fulfillment while stealing their essence. The only way to break its hold was a ritual, a dangerous one. It required blood, fire, and a recitation of words from a language long dead. The instructions were fragmented, parts missing or mistranslated, but it was all I had. The ritual had to be performed on the anniversary of my first wish. New Year's Eve was only days away. As the date approached, the mirror's behavior grew more erratic. Its whispers turned to screams, waking me in the dead of night. My reflection appeared in other surfaces, windows, puddles, even the blank screen of my phone, always watching, always grinning. The night of the ritual, I prepared everything meticulously. Candles formed a circle around the mirror, their flames flickering despite the still air. A silver knife rested in my trembling hand, its edge sharp enough to draw blood. The room felt colder than ever, the mirror glowing faintly in the darkness. I began the incantation, the ancient words rolling off my tongue like broken glass. The mirror reacted immediately. Its surface churned, the symbols on its frame blazing with light. My reflection pressed against the glass, its face contorted with rage. "You'll never escape me," it hissed, its voice a guttural snarl that echoed through the room. I ignored it, continuing the chant. The mirror screamed, a high, piercing sound that shook the walls. My reflection clawed at the glass, its movements frantic and unnatural. Blood dripped onto the surface, the final piece of the ritual. The mirror convulsed, its light growing blinding. I shouted the last word of the incantation, and the glass exploded outward in a shower of shards. When the light faded, the mirror was gone. All that remained was the frame, its symbols burned into the wood. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. The room was silent, the oppressive presence finally lifted. But as I caught my breath, I noticed something. The shards of glass scattered around me still shimmered faintly, each one reflecting a fragment of my face. And in every reflection, my eyes burned with a familiar, predatory gleam. In the weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself it was over. The mirror was gone, its oppressive whispers silenced, and life should have returned to normal. But normal felt impossibly out of reach. The shards haunted me. No matter how carefully I swept the room, I couldn't escape them. Tiny slivers of glass would catch the light from impossible angles, appearing in the folds of my sheets, beneath my shoes, even embedded in my skin. Each fragment reflected a distorted version of myself, my features stretched and hollow, my eyes glowing faintly with that terrible, predatory gleam. I stopped looking in mirrors entirely, but it didn't matter. My reflection was everywhere. The screen of my phone, the gleam of a polished table, even the sheen of my coffee mug. They all showed me the same twisted visage. It was as if the mirror had fractured something inside me, leaving pieces of itself embedded in the world around me. The feeling of being watched never went away. It grew stronger, suffocating, as though I carried the mirror's curse in my blood. At night, I would wake to find my room unnaturally cold, the faint sound of glass cracking echoing from the walls. My dreams were worse, vivid, nightmarish scenes of my reflection stepping out of the mirror, its jagged grin spreading impossibly wide as it reached for me. One night I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold, a faint but unmistakable whisper. "Look at me." My heart hammered in my chest. I turned toward the sound, finding nothing but darkness. The room was silent, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. I reached for the lamp, fumbling with the switch, but the bulb flickered weakly and went out. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You can't hide forever." The air grew colder, thick with a sense of something wrong. My body was frozen, my mind screaming for me to move, to flee, but my limbs refused to obey. Then I saw it, faint at first, but growing sharper as my eyes adjusted. A reflection. It hovered in the darkness, faint and shimmering, like a broken shard of glass suspended in the air. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't me. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, its lips curling into a wicked smile. "You broke the mirror," it said, its voice layered with echoes, each word dripping with malice. "But you can't break me." The reflection stepped forward, its form solidifying as it emerged from the shadow. Its body was cracked and jagged, as if it were made entirely of splintered glass, but it moved with unnatural fluidity. I scrambled backward, my hands searching for anything to defend myself. My fingers closed around one of the mirror's shards, a cruel twist of irony. The jagged edge bit into my palm, warm blood dripping onto the floor. The reflection paused, tilting its head as if amused. "You think you can stop me with that?" Summoning every ounce of courage, I gripped the shard tightly and slashed at the figure. It shattered into 1,000 fragments, each piece scattering across the room. For a brief, dizzying moment, I thought I'd won. But then the pieces began to move. Each shard trembled, vibrating like a swarm of insects. They lifted into the air, spinning faster and faster, forming a swirling vortex of glass. From the center, the reflection reassembled, its jagged edges sharper, its grin wider. "You can't destroy what's already a part of you," it hissed, stepping closer. Desperation consumed me. I hurled the shard in my hand at the reflection, but it passed through harmlessly, embedding itself in the wall. The figure loomed over me, its glassy surface reflecting my fear. "You wished for this," it said, its voice a chilling echo. "Success, happiness, love. You asked, and I delivered. Now you belong to me." The reflection reached for me, its fingers cold and sharp as they closed around my throat. My vision blurred, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of shimmering light and jagged edges. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was my own twisted face grinning back at me, its expression triumphant. I woke up the next morning in my bed, drenched in sweat. The room was still, bathed in the pale light of dawn. For a moment I dared to hope it had all been a dream, but then I saw it, the faint shimmer of my reflection in the cracked screen of my phone. It stared back at me, its eyes burning with a cruel, unrelenting light. And as I gazed into those hollow eyes, I knew the truth. The mirror was gone, but its curse remained. I was no longer just myself. I was a fractured reflection, a living shard of its twisted design, and it was still watching. Always watching.